for watching Numbskull News, and today we're going to talk about Project Mayhem. Oh, that's that's a Fight Club actually. Project X, no, that's a bad mid 2000s teenage comedy. Project Rudy, that's the one, and I'm sure everyone's heard everything about it already. Read this and that and the other thing about it. Ross Dillinger came out with this big explosive article, so I'm sure everyone's aware of most of the details, so I'm not going to bore you to death with that crap. However, I've never been a Super League person. Now, I did a video a few months ago talking about how a certain Super League could happen. Greg Sankey seemed like he was kind of worried about it in an interview that he gave, that a group of people backed with a hell of a lot of private equity money were interested and were talking to SEC schools, and this put him off a little bit and said, why mess with that when we could do it ourselves? However, I did not know he was talking about this particular thing. So this is what everyone seems to think, that he was talking about Project Rudy. Well, first of all, this is not a Super League thing. This is a breakaway. Pac-4 breaking away from the G5, the Pac-12, the FCS, all that shit. It's a breakaway. But as far as Super League crap went, I always had some questions. That's why I didn't believe it. I'm like, how are you going to do regulation, for instance? Because you're going to strip down all these conferences, and how does that work? How do you... So you telling me you can earn your way to the SEC and all that? Well, this answers that. That's not regulation. Your schools will be in whatever conferences they currently are in the P4, Big 12, ACC, SEC, and the Big 10. No, you move up and down tiers as far as getting paid. That's the tier system. That's how you get paid. So that also answers the money part. Because I was always like, well, if there's going to be all this unequal revenue share, then why the hell do it if you're the Big 12 or the ACC? Well, this actually doesn't guarantee every Big 12 and ACC team, a upper level spot where you're increasing your money like a son of a bitch. But there's quite a few teams in each, the Big 12 and the ACC, that would get into the, that tier 2 bracket that would earn current levels of Big 10 and SEC money. That ain't bad. But it's still unequal, like if you're the Big 12. That's concerning, isn't it? Because, we don't have any teams that would get into that tier 1. But, upwards of close to 8 teams possibly getting into the tier 2, yeah, that's very doable. And let's say that happens. Then you got another 8 that are making significantly less. That's a big gap within your conference. But I do think a way to mitigate that would be each team that's in that upper level agrees to give a certain percentage to, put into a pie, if you will, and then divide that pie up amongst the teams at the lower levels. That way, there'll still be a gap, but it's a workable gap. If you can keep it within 10 million, I think that's doable. And just because everybody is working through the same media rights doesn't mean that you have to distribute things the way they tell you to. Because the tiers are only for individual teams. Each individual conference that's a part of this, well, they can distribute things however they feel is correct. So every team can just keep whatever they make, or they can help some of the lower teams, not be so low, if you will. That would probably be most important in the SEC and the Big 10, because all the tier 1 is going to be made up mostly of those schools. Maybe FSU sneaks into the tier 1. Maybe Clemson, maybe not. You can have that argument, But it's feasible, 16 teams in tier 1, that Florida State, at least Florida State, would be one of those teams. But everybody else is going to be Big Ten and SEC. So if you're a, and by the way, there'll be teams in the middle in tier 2, and there'll be SEC and Big Ten teams in tier 3. So if you're one of those, if you're a Northwestern, if you're a Vanderbilt, you're probably not too high on this deal because you're going to lose money. Well, if the SEC and the Big Ten kind of do what I think the Big 12 could do, which all those teams in the upper echelons give a portion, just a small percentage, especially tier 1, that's a small percentage of what you would make. To filter that down and shoot it down to the teams in tier 3, that way they're closer to what they're making now. They're not really losing money. That's achievable. It could be done. ACC would definitely be on board with this because, they would like to keep their conference together, including Florida State and Clemson, because why move conferences if you're them to? Why continue a lawsuit if you go to this? You wouldn't have to. Whatever tier you're in. Either way, you're making the kind of money you want to make. So if you're those two. So there's no reason to bounce out the ACC. Plus the ACC is much easier to win than the SEC or the Big Ten. So they would be in the catbird seat over there. They could find themselves most years in the playoff. But there's a lot of talk that Greg Sankey and possibly a lot of people in the Big Ten and the SEC don't really like this. They don't like the idea of giving up control. Well, you would have to give up some of it. All right, so here's the thing. This whole thought that Greg Sankey threw out there, well, we can do it ourselves. No, not without private equity you can't. Now, you may think, well, just the Big Ten and the SEC, that's the big fear, right? That they would break away from everybody else. Well, the reason this Smash Capital Project Rudy idea is quote-unquote brilliant, that, of course, coming from a high-level SEC person. The reason it's brilliant is because it does bring in the Big 12. It does bring in the ACC. If you want to fully be able to monopolize. Ooh. Freudian slip. If you want to monetize this thing fully, you have the entirety of the Power Four. Okay? But that would also tamp down on the lawsuits. All right, because already, even with the Power Four breaking away, you're going to have lawsuits from the G5 and the Pac-12. It'll happen. Now, with private equity money, you can afford to pay everybody off. Get them off your back, kiss our ass, move on. And by the way, don't feel sorry for the G5. I mean, all this hand-wringing. Oh, the poor G5. Where are they now? Is there any team that's a threat to win a national title in the G5? Or the Pac-12? No. They never have been. The closest they got was Cincinnati making a playoff. That's it. That's it. Forever, they've been way down on revenue. When it was the Power 5, they were far below the Power 5 when the Pac-12 was the Pac-12. They made way more money than the Mountain West. Way more money than the American. And then it just goes down from there when you're talking about the MAC. When you're talking about the Sun Belt or Conference USA. Come on, people. They were in a no-win scenario anyway. The only thing it's going to cost them is they no longer get to play Power 4 schools in football. Because no one's talking about that in track and field or wrestling or volleyball, softball, baseball. Hell, ain't even talking about that in basketball. It's about football. And yeah, will they lose some revenue on that? Yeah, that's where the private equity comes in. They're going to sue. You settle it, and then you bounce. Let them divide up a few million a school and get the hell out of there. Say, okay, here's you a few million apiece. Piss off. And I hate to sound like a jerk. I just imagine that's what Sankey or Petiti would think. They probably do already. But no, there won't be any breakaway, just the Big Ten and just the SEC. Now, I'm a Big 12 homer. Of course I am. Feel free to point that crap out in the comments. But yes, I am. And do I want them to try to break away from the Big 12 or the ACC? No, I don't. It's bad for the conference that I root for, of course. Number one, that would be kind of stupid because you're limiting the money that you can make. I know, the Big 12's worthless, right? Maybe the ACC's worthless too. Well, what I've said forever, content is king. Now, the Big Ten, the SEC, they give you the big matchups, the big ratings draws as far as individual teams or rivalries. The problem is ESPN, Fox, NBC, CBS, Peacock, ESPN Plus, they need content. A lot more than just those two conferences can provide in Notre Dame. That doesn't work. Just doesn't work. So what they need are more games. More games that actually get decent ratings. Like I said, it's not the SEC, it's not the Big Ten, but it's really valuable additional content. And these media corporations need that content, and they'll be willing to pay for it. They're willing to pay for it, folks. And yes, the Power Four together can get a bigger deal, much bigger contract than just the Big Ten and the SEC put together. Sorry. Now, a lot of that value, of course, comes from the SEC and the Big Ten. But when you add the content of the Big 12 and the ACC to the deal, it makes it a richer deal. Sure, you got to pay more teams, but with this tier system, you kind of keep things in line, if you will. So, do I like the plan overall? I think it could work. Like I said, the ACC, I think, is fully on board. I think they would absolutely do it. Because if the deal happens, then realignment stops. It's done. As far as the Power Four goes, there's no, ACC teams go into the Big 12 at that point. Because the ACC will stay intact as currently constituted. And by the way, the Big 12, anybody has a dream of going to the Big 10, there's been talk about that. Well, that shit stops in its tracks, and everyone is permanent Big 12 teams, period. There won't be any movement like that. Because there's no need for it. Everyone's going to play each other. Because they won't be playing the G5. They won't be playing the Pac-12. They won't be playing FCS Alabama. But the control issue with the SEC. Let me get back to that. Let me weave back to that. Yeah, that's going to be an issue. But when Greg Sankey, why don't we do that ourselves? Because you don't have the mind for it, Greg Sankey. A place like Smash Capital, the people running it, the architects, if you will, these guys have tons of media experience. And they also have a crap ton of experience dealing with private equity. They know the synergies, they know how the combos, the right way to do things, the smart way to do things, and what not to do. Greg Sankey doesn't know this shit. If for all this, talk, hand-wringing, well, is Greg Sankey going to allow it? Greg Sankey is an employee. He's not an employer. He has bosses. He has 16 of them, as a matter of fact. He'll do what they tell him to do. And if Alabama and Georgia and Texas and LSU and whomever look at that tier 1 and say, we can get into that tier 1. Maybe even the protected 8 tier 1. We can get in there and eventually be making, $250 million a year. Look, any kind of deal Greg Sankey's going to make sure his conference gets paid like that, you're going to have to give up a lot. All right. You have to give up scheduling. Scheduling's out the window to get that. With this deal or any deal. Any deal. The Big Ten and the SEC have the biggest say on how the CFP is going to work. You'll have to give that shit up. It'll get expanded to whatever the media partners want to get the most money, the most bang for their buck, if you will. Like I said, the scheduling thing, that's going to be completely out of your hands. And maybe not completely. You'll have a say. All right, the SEC and the Big Ten will still have a say in scheduling. The ACC and the Big 12 will still have a say. But it's going to go the way the media partners want it to go. All right, if they want you to play on Friday, you're playing on Friday. Nothing to do there. No. And as far as like scheduling individual games, that's going to be taken out of your hands. Those media partners will generate what they need. So your non-conference schedule may not be all up front the first 3 games. They may sprinkle that throughout. Because if you got Ohio State versus Georgia, do we want to burn that the first week of the season? Or do we want to have that as like a mid-season kind of thing? And flex schedule it to whatever. It's going to be up to the media partners. It won't be up to the conferences at that point. Everything that makes more money, it's going to be the conferences, the media partners, and the private equity firm. Because they want a return on their investment. And the reason they're wanting to invest billions, plural, billions of dollars into this, because there's billions to make. So they're not worried about a return on the investment. They'll get the return. But they'll have to have a big say. It won't just be Greg Sankey or Tony Petitti deciding everything. Just won't. They'll just be another voice in the room. A valuable voice, but just another one. Like it or not. That's the way that goes. And if you want to do this kind of deal, regardless if the SEC is like, we could do our own deal. Well, okay. Good luck. That's dumb. Right now, as it stands, because there's still a lot of stuff up in the air. Still don't know everything. But there's still a lot of options, like I said, you could play with this thing. But do I kind of like it? I think I kind of like it. I don't think it's a bad thing. Like I said, there's a lot of hand wringing about it. But I don't know. I think it would. I think it could work. I think it would work for the Big 12. How does everyone else feel about it? Don't know. But we'll find out. There's meetings with the SEC and the Big 10, but they ain't going to decide much of anything right now. But I can't wait for them to try to do this on their own, look into it. They're going to find out that they don't know shit. Why do you think this Smash Capital doesn't have a problem, pitching this idea and all this stuff? Because who else are you going to go with? Some other private equity firm that does not have the experience that this one does? And not to mention, you got old Jack Swarbrick. Why? Because Notre Dame gets in this thing. They'll be in that top 16 tier, and they'll probably be in that protected 8 tier that never have to worry about relegation. And this would ensure they will never, ever, ever have to join a conference. So they get their cake and they get to eat it and they get to crap on your chest. Oh, well, we'll keep an eye on it, see what happens. When the news breaks, I'll make a video. Anyway, thanks for watching this crap, and I'll be back with some other crap later. Bye.